My name is Lydia, and I'm 32 years old. I'm standing in my mother's living room right now, staring at an old family photo on the wall. 8 months ago, I stood alone in my wedding dress, waiting for her to show up. Instead, she called from the airport in Hawaii, telling me my brother needed her more. Today, I'm here to take back everything she assumed was hers. Before I share what happened next, I'd love to know where you're watching from today. If this story resonates with you, please consider subscribing and hitting that notification bell. Growing up in suburban Michigan, our family seemed pretty normal from the outside. We had a nice house with a white fence, 2 cars in the driveway, and holiday decorations that went up right on schedule. But after my father passed away when I was 15 and Dylan was 12, everything changed. Mum worked as a nurse at the local hospital, pulling double shifts to keep us afloat. At least that's what she told everyone. The truth was more complicated. While Mum was working those long hours, I was the one making sure Dylan got to school on time, had clean clothes, and ate something besides cereal for dinner. I learned to cook by watching cooking shows after school, burned more meals than I care to remember, and eventually got good enough that Dylan would actually request my spaghetti on Fridays. Mum would come home exhausted, pat Dylan on the head, and collapse into bed. She never noticed the dishes I'd washed or the homework I'd helped him finish. By the time I turned 16, I was working at the mall food court, saving every penny for college. Mum said she couldn't help with tuition because money was tight, and I understood. What I didn't understand was why Dylan got a brand new car for his 18th birthday, while I was still taking the bus to Northwestern University. When I asked about it, Mum said Dylan needed reliable transportation for his part-time job, the job he quit 2 weeks later. My graduation from high school should have been a celebration. I was valedictorian, had earned a full scholarship to Northwestern, and was the first person in our extended family to get into such a prestigious school. Mum arrived 45 minutes late to the ceremony because Dylan had a slight cold and she wanted to make sure he took his medicine. She missed my speech, the one where I thanked her for teaching me to be independent. The irony wasn't lost on me. College became my escape. I threw myself into my marketing degree, joined the debate team, and made friends who actually showed up when they said they would. When I called home, Mum would spend 5 minutes asking about my classes and 45 minutes updating me on Dylan's latest drama. His professors were too harsh, his roommate was too loud, his girlfriend didn't understand him. There was always something that required Mum's immediate attention and usually her credit card. The day I got my first real job offer, a junior marketing position at a tech startup in Chicago, I called Mum immediately. She said congratulations, then launched into a story about how Dylan was thinking about changing majors for the 3rd time. When I bought my first condo 2 years later, a small 1-bedroom in Lincoln Park that I'd saved for meticulously, she couldn't come see it because Dylan was stressed about finals. He was 25 at the time. Then I met James at a friend's birthday party. He was 34, worked as a software engineer, and had this way of really listening when I talked. Not the polite nodding most people do, but actual listening. He remembered things I mentioned in passing and brought them up weeks later. When I told him about my family dynamics, he didn't judge or offer solutions. He just held my hand and said he was sorry I'd been carrying so much for so long. Our relationship developed slowly, carefully. James had been burned before too, though in different ways. His ex-wife had cleaned out their savings account and disappeared with his best friend. We both knew what betrayal felt like, and maybe that's why we were so gentle with each other. 3 years in, he proposed at Navy Pier during the fireworks show. The ring wasn't huge, but it was perfect, a vintage Art Deco piece he'd found at an estate sale, because he knew I loved anything with history. When I called Mum to share the news, her response was typical. She said congratulations, asked if James made good money, and then spent 20 minutes telling me about Dylan's latest job interview that he was anxious about. She didn't ask about the proposal, the ring, or our plans. I sat in my apartment afterward, staring at my engagement ring, and wondering if she'd even remember I was engaged the next time we talked. Planning the wedding became my project, and I threw myself into it with the same determination I brought to everything else. We decided on a small, intimate ceremony with about 150 guests. James's family was flying in from California, and they were already more involved than my own mother. His mum, Patricia, called weekly to check in, offered to help with centerpieces, and even flew in early to attend my dress fitting. 6 months before the wedding, I made one more attempt to involve my mother. I scheduled the dress fitting for a Saturday afternoon when she wasn't working and gave her 3 weeks' notice. The morning of, she called to cancel. Dylan needed help researching graduate schools, and apparently this couldn't wait. I stood in that boutique wearing the dress I'd chosen myself while the seamstress pinned the hem and Patricia held my hand. The sales associate asked if my mother was running late, and I just smiled and said she had an emergency. The venue was a restored barn about an hour outside Chicago, surrounded by wildflowers and oak trees. James and I fell in love with it immediately. When I sent Mum pictures, her only response was that it looked dusty. I chose navy and gold for the colours, hired a photographer who specialised in candid shots, and found a caterer who could do both traditional American fare and some Filipino dishes for James's extended family. Every decision I made alone or with James. Mum never asked to see anything or offered opinions unless they were criticisms. 2 months before the wedding, things took a turn. Dylan announced at Sunday dinner that he'd been invited on a trip to Hawaii with his college buddies. The dates he mentioned made my blood run cold. It was the same week as my wedding. I looked at Mum, waiting for her to say something to remind him of the conflict. Instead, she said she was sure they could work something out. Dylan shrugged and said he'd already put down a deposit. That night, Mum pulled me aside and promised she'd handle it. She said Dylan was just being thoughtless and she'd make sure he changed his plans. For once, I believed her. Maybe it was the wedding affecting my judgment, or maybe I just desperately wanted her to choose me this one time. Either way, I went home feeling like finally, she understood what was important. The bridal shower was Sarah's idea. Sarah had been my best friend since college, the one who'd seen me through every family disappointment and career triumph. She organised everything at a beautiful Italian restaurant downtown, complete with those tissue paper flowers I'd mentioned liking once. 30 of my friends and relatives came, including James's sister Jennifer, who'd flown in specially. Mum arrived 2 hours late. She walked in while we were already eating dessert, wearing jeans and a wrinkled t-shirt. She'd forgotten to bring a gift. When Sarah's mum asked if everything was all right, Mum laughed and said Dylan had called needing help packing for his trip. My heart sank. He was still going to Hawaii. When I confronted her in the bathroom, she waved me off and said they'd figure it out, that I worried too much. The week before the wedding was a blur of last-minute preparations. The rehearsal dinner was at James's parents' favourite steakhouse. They'd insisted on hosting, and I was grateful because I couldn't imagine Mum organising anything that didn't revolve around Dylan. She sat at the dinner, texting the entire time, her phone buzzing constantly. When Patricia tried to engage her in conversation about the ceremony, Mum just nodded absently and kept typing. After dinner, I cornered her outside. I asked point blank if Dylan was still planning to go to Hawaii. She looked at me with this expression of mild annoyance, like I was being dramatic, and said everything was handled. She promised she'd be at the wedding, walking me down the aisle like we'd discussed, since Dad couldn't. I wanted to push harder, but James squeezed my shoulder and I let it go. One more day, I thought. Just get through one more day. The night before the wedding, I stayed at the hotel with my bridesmaids. We drank champagne, watched romantic comedies, and painted our nails. Sarah kept checking on me, asking if I was okay. I told her I was perfect, because at that moment, I was. Tomorrow, I was marrying James, and that was all that mattered. Mum hadn't responded to my goodnight text, but Dylan had posted photos from the airport on Instagram. I turned off my phone and went to bed. The morning of my wedding started like a dream. Sunlight streamed through the hotel windows at 6 o'clock, and I woke up feeling lighter than air. This was it, the day I'd been planning for over a year. Sarah brought me coffee and a croissant from the bakery down the street, and we sat on the bed looking at old photos from college, laughing at our terrible fashion choices and remembering simpler times. By 7, the suite was buzzing with activity. The hairstylist arrived first, followed by the makeup artist. My bridesmaids flitted around in matching robes, champagne glasses in hand, music playing from someone's phone. Jennifer was curling the flower girl's hair, while Patricia steamed my veil. Everything was perfect, exactly as I'd imagined it would be. At 8:30, I sent Mum a text asking if she needed directions to the venue. No response. I told myself she was probably driving. At 9, I called. It rang once and went to voicemail. Sarah noticed my frown and asked if everything was okay. I nodded and smiled, but something cold was settling in my stomach. By 10 o'clock, with just 2 hours until the ceremony, panic was creeping in. I'd called Mum 6 times. Nothing. Patricia kept asking when my mother would arrive for photos, and I kept making excuses. She was probably stuck in traffic. Her phone must have died. She was never good with technology anyway. Each lie felt heavier than the last. Then at 10:15, my phone rang. Mom's name flashed on the screen, and I practically lunged for it. Relief flooded through me until I heard the airport announcement in the background. My mother's voice was casual, almost bored, as she explained that she was at O'Hare at the gate for a flight to Honolulu. Dylan had what she called a stress-induced breakdown about his graduate school applications. He needed her support, she said. He couldn't handle this alone. I stood there in my wedding dress. The phone pressed to my ear, unable to speak. She kept talking, explaining how Dylan's mental health was fragile, how she was the only one who could help him through this, how I would understand when I had children of my own. That last part cut the deepest. She actually thought someday I'd abandon my own daughter on her wedding day and think it was justified. When I finally found my voice, it came out as a whisper. I asked her to please reconsider, to let Dylan go alone, to choose me just this once. She sighed like I was being unreasonable and said Dylan needed her more. Then she said she had to board and hung up. No apology, no acknowledgement of what she was taking from me, just dial tone. I must have stood there for 5 minutes, maybe 10, still holding the phone. Sarah found me like that and immediately knew something was catastrophically wrong. When I told her, she looked like she wanted to break something. Jennifer started crying. Patricia pulled me into a fierce hug and whispered that I was gaining a mother today, not losing one. The makeup artist had to redo my face twice. Every time I thought I was okay, another wave would hit. The photographer kept asking where my mother was for the getting ready shots. The videographer wanted to interview her. The wedding planner needed to know if we should remove her chair from the ceremony. Each question was another reminder of her absence. At 11:45, 15 minutes before the ceremony, I made a decision. I would not let her ruin this day. I looked at myself in the mirror, adjusted my veil, and walked out of that room with my head high. Robert James's father was waiting outside. Without me asking, he offered his arm and said it would be his honor to walk me down the aisle. I nearly started crying again, but for entirely different reasons. The ceremony itself was a blur of beauty and pain. James's face when he saw me made everything else fade for a moment. His eyes were full of love and something else, a fierce protectiveness that told me he knew something was wrong. We'd promised not to see each other before the ceremony, but I'd had Sarah text him about Mum. I was grateful he knew. It meant I didn't have to pretend with him. When the officiant asked who gave this woman to be married, Robert said loudly and clearly that he and Patricia did with joy and pride. A murmur ran through my side of the family. Everyone noticed the empty chair with Mum's name card. My Aunt Barbara, Mum's sister, was sitting in the second row with tears streaming down her face. Not happy tears. During the reception, I became an expert at deflection. When people asked about Mum, I said she'd had a medical emergency. Nothing serious, but she couldn't travel. Most people accepted this, though I caught the knowing looks between relatives. The mother-son dance was particularly brutal. James danced with Patricia while I stood on the sidelines trying not to watch. Then Robert stepped in and asked me to dance, announcing to everyone that he was proud to welcome another daughter to their family. Dylan posted photos from Hawaii throughout the reception. Mum was in several of them, smiling on the beach, holding a Mai Tai, looking perfectly healthy. My cousin showed me thinking I'd want to see that Mum was okay. I handed back her phone and went to the bathroom, where I sat in a stall and let myself feel the full weight of it for exactly 3 minutes. Then I fixed my lipstick and returned to my wedding. James and I had our first dance to a song we'd picked months ago, something about finding home in another person. As we swayed together, he whispered that he loved me, that I was his family, now that we didn't need anyone else. I believed him. When the song ended and everyone applauded, I looked out at the faces of people who'd actually shown up and realized he was right. The photographer worked overtime to make the family photos look balanced. James's enormous extended family filled one side, while my handful of relatives clustered on the other. In every shot, there was a space where my mother should have been. Later, when we got the photos back, that empty space would scream at me from every group shot. But that night, I just smiled until my face hurt. Our honeymoon in Italy was supposed to be 2 weeks of pure bliss. We'd saved for it, carefully choosing small family-run hotels and planning to eat our weight in pasta. The first 3 days were perfect. We wandered through Rome, threw coins in the Trevi fountain, and got lost in narrow streets that led to hidden trattorias. I almost forgot about the wedding disaster. Then Mum started texting, not to apologize or ask about the wedding, but to send photos from Hawaii. There she was with Dylan at a luau. Here they were on a sunset cruise. This one showed them at the top of Diamond Head. Each message felt like another slap. She included captions like, "Having an amazing time, and Dylan really needed this." Not once did she ask about my honeymoon or mention missing the wedding. On day 4, I blocked her number. James found me crying on our hotel balcony in Florence, my phone in pieces after I'd thrown it at the wall. He didn't judge, just went out and bought me a new one. When I turned it on, there were 17 missed calls from various relatives. Apparently, Mum was telling everyone I was being dramatic and punishing her for supporting Dylan through a crisis. Aunt Barbara sent a long email explaining what really happened. Dylan hadn't had any breakdown. He'd simply told Mum the trip was important for networking, that some of his friends had connections in tech companies with Hawaii offices. Mum had immediately agreed this was more important than my wedding because it could affect Dylan's future career. Barbara had tried to reason with her, but Mum accused her of not understanding a mother's sacrifice. The rest of the honeymoon I swung between rage and grief. James was patient, letting me vent during long walks through Tuscan vineyards and holding me when the anger dissolved into tears. He shared his own stories about family disappointments, not to compare, but to let me know I wasn't alone. By the time we flew home, I'd made a decision. I would try one more time with Mum, but on my terms. The first call came 2 days after we returned. Mum acted like nothing had happened, launching immediately into a story about Dylan's job search. When I interrupted and said we needed to talk about the wedding, she sighed and said I was being overly sensitive. She actually used the words overly sensitive about her missing my wedding. When I pushed harder, she said she'd made a choice any good mother would make, and I'd understand someday. I hung up on her. It was the first time in my life I'd ever done that. She called back immediately, but I didn't answer. James and I were unpacking our honeymoon souvenirs, and I remember holding the small glass ornament we'd bought in Venice, thinking how fragile and beautiful it was, how easily it could shatter. Like trust. Like relationships that should be unbreakable, but aren't. 2 weeks passed before I answered her calls again. She wanted to have lunch to move forward to put this behind us. I agreed mostly because I needed to see if she understood what she'd done. We met at a restaurant equidistant between our homes, neutral territory. She arrived late, of course, because Dylan had called with a crisis about his apartment lease. The lunch was excruciating. She spent 40 minutes talking about Dylan's various problems while I pushed salad around my plate. When I finally got a word in and asked if she understood how much her absence had hurt me, she waved her hand dismissively and said, "Weddings were just parties, that marriage was what mattered." She'd been married to Dad without any fuss, and look how that turned out. The casual cruelty of bringing up my dead father to justify abandoning me took my breath away. Thanksgiving came faster than expected. Mum insisted on hosting, and despite everything I agreed to go. Maybe it was muscle memory, or maybe I was still hoping for a miracle. James was skeptical but supportive. He promised we could leave the moment I wanted to, and I loved him even more for that escape plan. The house smelled like turkey and stuffing when we arrived, familiar and comforting for about 10 seconds. Then Dylan appeared, talking loudly on his phone about some startup idea that was definitely going to make him rich. He barely acknowledged our presence, just waved and continued his conversation. Mum bustled around him, refilling his wine glass and asking if he needed anything. When we finally sat down to eat, Mum had placed Dylan at the head of the table, Dad's old spot. She served him first, gave him the biggest portions, and hung on every word of his meandering story about a coding boot camp he was considering. When James tried to share news about his recent promotion, Mum literally turned away mid-sentence to ask Dylan about his dietary restrictions for the boot camp meals. The breaking point came over dessert. Mum brought out a photo album saying she wanted to share family memories. Every single photo was of Dylan. Dylan as a baby, Dylan at graduation, Dylan at various jobs he'd quit. When I asked if there were any photos of me, she looked confused and said they must be in another album. She never went to look for it. Christmas was worse. I'd spent hours finding Mum the perfect gift, a cashmere scarf in her favourite colour from a boutique she'd mentioned years ago. I wrapped it carefully, wrote a heartfelt card about hoping for a fresh start. Dylan gave her a gas station gift card, literally still in the plastic bag from the gas station. She gushed over his thoughtfulness for 5 minutes. Her gift to me was a $50 gift card to a department store. Generic and personal, probably purchased at the grocery store checkout. Dylan received a Rolex. When James's jaw literally dropped, Mum explained that Dylan needed it for job interviews to look professional. The watch cost more than she'd contributed to my entire wedding, which was nothing. I left before dessert claiming a headache. Mum didn't try to stop me. January passed in a blur of work and deliberately avoided family contact. February brought Valentine's Day, which James and I spent at home, cooking together and not mentioning my mother once. By March, I'd started therapy to deal with what my therapist called complicated grief. I was mourning a mother who was still alive, but had never really existed the way I needed her to. Then came the phone call that changed everything. It was a Tuesday evening in early May, 8 months after the wedding. James and I were cooking dinner, music playing, wine poured when my phone rang. Mum's name appeared and I almost didn't answer. But something, maybe instinct, or maybe just habit, made me pick up. Her voice was different, sweeter than usual, almost syrupy. She asked about my day, my work, even James. Red flags immediately went up. Mum never asked about these things unless she wanted something. I stayed quiet, letting her fill the silence with nervous chatter about the weather, her garden, the new neighbours. Finally, she got to the point. The house needed a new roof. The contractor's estimate was $15,000 and she didn't have it. She'd already asked Dylan, but he was going through financial difficulties and couldn't help. I almost laughed at that. Dylan was always going through financial difficulties because he spent money like it grew on trees and Mum enabled him. But now she needed me, the responsible one, the one with savings. She laid it on thick, how she'd raised us alone after Dad died, how hard she'd worked, how the house was our childhood home and held so many memories. She promised to pay me back, though we both knew that would never happen. Then came the real manipulation. She mentioned that the house would be mine in her will, that she'd already decided Dylan would get other assets. I knew immediately this was a lie. After I hung up, I did something I should have done years ago. I called Aunt Barbara and asked for the truth. What I learned made my blood boil. Dylan had just bought a new car, a $60,000 sports car. Mum had given him $30,000 for the down payment just 2 weeks ago. The financial difficulties he was experiencing were entirely self-inflicted, and Mum was still bankrolling his lifestyle. Barbara also mentioned seeing Dylan's social media posts about planning a 3-week European vacation for the summer. First-class flights, luxury hotels, the works. While Mum was calling me, crying poverty about her roof, she was funding Dylan's grand tour. The pattern was so clear, so established, that I wondered how I'd ignored it for so long. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed replaying every moment of favoritism, every excuse, every time I'd been pushed aside for Dylan's wants. Not needs, wants. The wedding was just the culmination of a lifetime of being second best in my mother's eyes. James held me as I finally admitted out loud what I'd always known. She didn't love me the same way she loved Dylan. Maybe she didn't love me at all. I spent the next day at work distracted running scenarios in my head. What if I gave her the money? Nothing would change. What if I refused? She'd guilt-trip me, probably sick, the entire family on me. What if I tried to have another honest conversation? She'd deflect, minimize, and somehow make me the villain. By lunch, I knew what I had to do. That evening, I went through my apartment gathering evidence. Screenshots of Dylan's social media showing his new car, his vacation plans, his expensive dinners out. Bank records showing my wedding expenses that Mum contributed nothing to. Photos from the wedding where she was absent. Text messages where she cancelled on me for Dylan. I compiled it all into a folder, my case for the defense of my own sanity. I also gathered something else. Every birthday card that meant something, every photo of Dad and me that Mum had never displayed, every achievement certificate from school that had been shoved in a drawer. These were mine, had always been mine, even if they'd been kept at Mum's house. I made a list of things I wanted back, things that belonged to someone who valued them. James watched me work with a mixture of pride and concern. When I explained my plan, he simply asked what I needed from him, not whether I should do it, not if I was sure, just what he could do to support me. I told him I needed to do this alone, but knowing he was in my corner was everything. He kissed my forehead and said he'd be waiting when I got back. The next morning, I called in sick to work. This was more important than any meeting or deadline. I put on professional clothes, the kind that made me feel powerful and put together. I grabbed my folder of evidence and my list of belongings. Then I drove to my childhood home for what I knew would be the last real conversation with my mother. Thursday morning came with clear skies and unusual resolve. I'd spent the previous night unable to sleep, running through what I wanted to say, what I needed to reclaim. James made me breakfast, though I could barely eat it. He offered one more time to come with me, but I knew this was something I had to face alone. This was my battle, my moment to finally stop being the forgotten daughter. The drive to Mum's house took 45 minutes, though I'd made it in 30 before, when she'd had one of her manufactured emergencies. This time I drove slowly, noting how the neighbourhoods changed from urban to suburban, how the trees got bigger and the houses got older. Each mile felt like travelling back in time, back to a childhood where I'd learnt to make myself small. I parked in front of the house where I'd grown up, the same cracked driveway, the same faded shutters. The roof looked fine to me, but then again, Mum had always been good at creating crises where none existed. Her car was in the driveway, Dylan's new sports car, conspicuously absent. Good. I wanted her alone for this. She answered the door in her housecoat coffee mug in hand, looking surprised to see me. The surprise quickly shifted to delight when she assumed I was there about the money. She ushered me in, already talking about how wonderful it would be to have the roof fixed before summer, how grateful she was to have such a responsible daughter. The living room hadn't changed much. Same floral couch, same coffee table with rings from years of drinks without coasters. But the walls told the real story. Photos of Dylan everywhere. Dylan at graduation, Dylan with friends, Dylan at various jobs, Dylan with mum. I counted exactly 2 photos of me, both partially hidden behind larger frames of Dylan. Mum offered coffee, her voice still carrying that false sweetness from the phone call. I declined and remained standing. Something in my posture must have warned her because she stopped chattering and looked at me with the first genuine attention I'd received in years. She asked if everything was all right, if James was okay, if I was sick. I pulled out my folder and placed it on the coffee table between us. Then I started talking. I told her about standing alone in my wedding dress, about the photographer asking where she was, about lying to everyone that she had an emergency. I told her about the years of missed events, the favoritism so obvious that even strangers commented on it, the way she'd trained me to expect nothing while giving Dylan everything. She tried to interrupt, to explain, to justify, but I kept going. I showed her the screenshots of Dylan's new car, his vacation plans, his expensive lifestyle that she was funding while claiming poverty. I asked her if she knew how much my wedding cost, if she knew what my job title was, if she could name a single one of my friends. Her silence was answer enough. When I finally stopped, she was red-faced. Whether from anger or shame, I couldn't tell. She said I was being dramatic, that I was jealous of Dylan, that I'd always been too sensitive. She actually used the word jealous as if wanting a mother's love was the same as coveting a toy. Then came the tears, the manipulation I'd expected. How hard her life had been, how difficult it was raising 2 children alone. I laughed. Actually laughed. Because I'd raised myself, and most of the time Dylan too. She'd been physically present, but emotionally absent for me, while helicoptering around Dylan. I told her about making dinner at 15 while she was at Dylan's parent-teacher conferences, about missing my own activities because no one could drive me, about working full-time through college while Dylan got a free ride through multiple major changes. She switched tactics, then moving from tears to anger. I was ungrateful, selfish, a bad daughter. She'd sacrificed everything for us, and this was how I repaid her. She brought up Dad again, saying he would be ashamed of me. That was the moment something inside me finally broke free. Not broke, but broke free. Like I'd been holding my breath underwater for years and finally surfaced. I looked her straight in the eye and said the words that had been building for months. Not this time, Mum. Not this time. I wouldn't be giving her money for the roof. I wouldn't be subsidizing Dylan's lifestyle through her anymore. I wouldn't be accepting crumbs of attention while pouring my love into a void. Not this time, and never again. She stood up, then shaking with rage. She said if I walked out that door without agreeing to help, I shouldn't bother coming back. I was no daughter of hers. The words that would have destroyed me even a year ago just bounced off, because I'd finally realized I'd never been a daughter to her, not really. I'd been a convenience, a backup plan, a resource to tap when Dylan's well ran dry. But I wasn't done. I stood up too and announced I was taking some things with me. Things that belonged to me or should have belonged to someone who valued them. She followed me through the house, protesting as I collected Dad's photo albums, the ones she'd never looked at because they contained pictures of him with me. I took my grandmother's jewelry box from her bedroom pieces she'd promised me, but never given, probably saving them for Dylan's future wife. In the basement, I found boxes of my childhood achievements, report cards, science fair ribbons, essays teachers had praised, all boxed up and forgotten while Dylan's participation trophies were displayed upstairs. I took those too. She stood at the top of the stairs threatening to call the police. I told her to go ahead and explain to them why she'd kept her daughter's belongings hostage for years. The last thing I took was from the kitchen, a recipe box that had belonged to Dad's mother. Inside were handwritten cards with recipes I'd used to teach myself to cook notes in my grandmother's careful script. Mum hadn't even known what it was when I picked it up. She'd probably never opened it. To her, it was just another thing taking up space. To me, it was proof that I came from people who knew how to nurture. I carried the boxes to my car while Mum stood on the porch, alternating between shouting threats and sobbing about betrayal. The neighbours were watching Mrs. Patterson from across the street, standing in her garden, pretending to water plants that didn't need it. I wondered what they'd heard over the years, what they'd thought about the daughter who rarely visited and the son who was always around. Before I left, I turned back one more time. Mum had stopped crying and was just standing there, looking somehow smaller than I'd ever seen her. For a moment, just a moment, I felt sorry for her. She'd chosen her favourite and built her world around him. Now Dylan would have to be everything for her son-friend purpose. I wondered if he was capable of that, or if she'd end up alone, surrounded by photos of the child she'd chosen over the one she'd lost. I said goodbye, not cruelly, just finally. Then I got in my car and drove away. In the rearview mirror, I saw her go back inside, probably to call Dylan and tell him how horrible I was. He'd comfort her, agree I was ungrateful, and then ask for money for something. The cycle would continue, just without me in it. The drive home felt different, lighter, like I'd been carrying rocks in my pockets for years and had finally emptied them out. I called James from the car, telling him it was done. He said he was proud of me and asked if I wanted to go out to celebrate or just come home. I chose home, our home, where photos on the walls included both of us, where achievements were celebrated, where love wasn't conditional. Dylan called that evening. I let it go to voicemail. His message was exactly what I'd expected. I was selfish, cruel, breaking Mum's heart. How could I abandon family over money? The irony of him, who'd taken hundreds of thousands over the years, calling me selfish, over $15,000 I wouldn't give, was not lost on me. I deleted the message and blocked his number. The family fallout was swift and predictable. Mum's version of events spread through the relatives like wildfire. I was painted as the ungrateful daughter who'd refused to help with essential home repairs, who'd stolen from her mother, who'd chosen money over family. Some believed her. Others, like Aunt Barbara, knew better and reached out to offer support. 3 months have passed since that Thursday morning. 3 months of silence from Mom and Dylan, of building a life without the constant weight of disappointment. The therapy helps. My therapist says I'm grieving, and she's right. Not grieving the mother I lost, but the mother I never had. The one who would have been at my wedding, who would have celebrated my achievements, who would have loved me as fiercely as she loved Dylan. James and I have started our own traditions. Sunday dinners with his parents, who call me daughter without hesitation. Holiday celebrations with friends who've become chosen family. Sarah throws me a birthday party every year, now something Mum never did after I turned 16. These people show up. They remember. They choose me again and again. Last week, Aunt Barbara called with news. Mum had taken out a loan for the roof, a high-interest one, because her credit was destroyed from years of funding Dylan's failures. Dylan had gone to Europe anyway, posting photos from Paris and Rome while Mum dealt with contractors alone. Barbara thought I should know, maybe expecting me to feel guilty. I didn't. I felt sad for Mum, but not guilty. She'd made her choices, and now she was living with them. Work has been my sanctuary. I threw myself into projects, earned another promotion, and now manage a team of 12. My boss says I have excellent leadership skills, that I'm good at making sure everyone feels valued. I know where that comes from. Years of being unseen taught me to really see others. It's a gift born from pain, but a gift nonetheless. The wedding photos sit on our mantle now, the ones Patricia had edited to minimize the obvious gap where Mom should have been. In them, I'm surrounded by people who chose to be there, who wouldn't have missed it for anything. James's family, our friends, the relatives who defied Mom's version of events to celebrate with us. That's my real family. Sometimes I dream about her. Not Mum as she is, but the Mum I invented as a child. The one who would have braided my hair for school dances, who would have cried happy tears at my graduation, who would have helped me pick out my wedding dress. I wake from these dreams with a momentary ache before remembering that James is beside me, that I'm loved, that I'm enough. The recipe box sits in our kitchen now, and I use it often. Last night, I made my grandmother's pot roast, the apartment filling with smells that reminded me of being young, of being hopeful. James says it's delicious, that we should have people over more often to share these recipes. He's right. These recipes, these memories, they deserve to be part of a home filled with love. People ask if I'll ever forgive her. The truth is, I already have, just not in the way they mean. I've forgiven her for my own peace, to release the anger that was poisoning me. But forgiveness doesn't mean reconciliation. It doesn't mean returning to a dynamic that nearly destroyed me. It means accepting what is and choosing to move forward without bitterness. Dylan sent a message through a cousin last month saying Mom misses me and that I should reach out. He didn't apologize, didn't acknowledge anything that had happened. Just said I should come back like I was a runaway pet who'd eventually return home. I didn't respond. There's nothing to say to someone who still doesn't see you as a full person deserving of equal love. I'm pregnant now, though only James and his parents know so far. When I found out, my first thought wasn't to call Mom. It was to promise this child that they would never have to earn my love, never have to compete for my attention, never have to make themselves smaller so someone else could be big. They would be seen, celebrated, chosen every single day of their life. Some nights, I stand in what will be the nursery, imagining the family we're building, one based on presence, not absence, on showing up, not excuses, on unconditional love, not favoritism. James finds me there sometimes, and we plan together. How we'll handle birthdays, holidays, challenges. How we'll be the parents we needed but didn't always have. The $15,000 Mum wanted sits in our savings account, earmarked for our child's education. It seems fitting that money she tried to guilt from me will instead go toward a future she won't be part of unless things drastically change. Not because I'm punishing her, but because I won't let history repeat itself. My child will never wonder why Grandma loves their cousin more than them. I still have the family photo from Mum's living room, the one I was barely in. I keep it in a drawer, not displayed, but not discarded either. Sometimes I look at it and see the whole story in one frame. Mum and Dylan in the center, bright and clear. Me on the edge, slightly out of focus, like I was already halfway gone. It's proof, if I ever doubt myself, that leaving was the right choice. The scarf I gave her for Christmas is probably still in its box tags on forgotten in a closet. The Rolex Dylan got is probably pawned by now sold to fund another failed venture or impulsive purchase. These objects carry the weight of our relationships. One thoughtful but unappreciated, the other valuable but meaningless. That's the difference between Dylan and me. I gave from love. He took from entitlement. There's a quote I found in therapy that stays with me. Sometimes you have to let go of the family you were born into to find the family you were meant to have. I found that family in James, in his parents, in the friends who've stood by me. They're teaching me what love looks like, when it's freely given, not rationed out, based on impossible standards, or stolen in moments of manipulation. Last week I saw a mother and daughter shopping for wedding dresses. The mother was crying, happy tears, taking photos, telling her daughter she was beautiful. I watched them for longer than I should have, feeling that familiar ache. But then I left and went home to James, to our life, to the family we're creating. That's what matters now, not the mother who chose otherwise. I sometimes wonder what Mum tells people about me now. Does she say I'm busy? That we're taking a break? Does she admit the truth that she pushed away one child while clinging to another? Or does she play the victim so well that she believes it herself? Dylan probably reinforces whatever story she tells. They need each other now, locked in their dysfunction, each enabling the other's worst tendencies. But that's their story now, not mine. Mine is about breaking cycles, choosing joy, building something better. It's about Sunday morning pancakes with James, about Patricia teaching me to knit, about Robert calling me for advice about his computer. It's about Sarah being the sister I never had, about colleagues who've become friends, about a life filled with people who show up. The empty chair at my wedding has become a symbol, but not of loss. It represents the space I've cleared for people who deserve to be there. Every relationship I've built since then has been intentional, reciprocal, based on mutual respect and genuine care. That chair wasn't empty. It was waiting for the right people to fill it, and now they have. Sometimes healing looks like absence, like refusing to answer the door when toxicity knocks, like changing your number, your habits, your expectations. It looks like choosing yourself when you've been trained to choose everyone else. It looks like saying not this time and meaning it even when your voice shakes, even when guilt tries to creep back in. I still drive past the old house occasionally, though not intentionally. It's on the way to other places, better places. Each time it looks smaller, less significant. The roof has been fixed now, according to Barbara. But the foundation, the real foundation of that family, remains cracked beyond repair. You can't fix favoritism with shingles and tar. You can't patch dysfunction with good intentions never followed through. This Thanksgiving we're hosting James's parents, Sarah and her husband, a few other friends who've become family. I'm using Grandma's recipes, the ones from the box I rescued. We'll sit around our table, everyone equally welcomed, equally celebrated. There won't be a hierarchy of love, no one served first, while others wait, no stories that only feature one person while others fade into the background. That's what I've learned through all of this. Family isn't about blood or obligation or guilt. It's about choosing each other over and over, especially when it's inconvenient. It's about showing up for weddings and funerals and random Tuesdays. It's about loving people not for what they can do for you, but for who they are. Mum never learnt that lesson. Dylan never had to. But I did the hard way, and now I get to live it every day. I'm standing in my living room now looking at our photos on the wall. Our wedding, our trips, our celebrations, all moments when people showed up. There are no empty spaces here, no obvious absences. This is what it looks like when you're chosen, when you're valued, when you're enough. And for the first time in my life, I truly believe that I am. The story could end here, with this peace, this acceptance. But I want to leave you with something more. If you're watching this, if you've stayed with me through this entire journey, maybe you see yourself in my story. Maybe you're the forgotten child, the one who gives but doesn't receive, the one still hoping that this time will be different. Let me tell you what I wish someone had told me years ago. It's not your fault. You deserved better. And it's okay to stop trying to earn love that should have been freely given. Family is supposed to be your soft place to land, not a battlefield where you're always losing. Love shouldn't be a competition where someone else always wins. You're allowed to stop playing a game where the rules ensure you'll never succeed. You're allowed to choose yourself, to build something better, to find people who see you for exactly who you are and celebrate that person. Not this time doesn't have to be angry. It can be peaceful. It can be the moment you stop breaking yourself into smaller pieces to fit into spaces that were never meant for you. It can be the beginning of a life where you're the main character, not the supporting role in someone else's drama. It can be freedom. So if you're struggling with similar family dynamics, if you're tired of being second best, if you're ready to stop accepting crumbs and demand the whole meal, remember these words. Not this time. Say them as many times as you need to. Say them until they become your truth, your boundary, your liberation, because you deserve to be chosen, celebrated, and loved without conditions. To those of you who've been following along, I have a question. Have you ever had to draw a hard line with family who couldn't see your worth? How did you find the strength to say enough is enough? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, if it made you think about your own relationships and boundaries, please consider giving it a like and sharing it with someone who might need to hear these words. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already and hit that notification bell so you don't miss future stories about breaking cycles, finding yourself, and building the life you deserve. Thank you for being here, for witnessing my journey, and for being part of this community where we can share these difficult truths. Until next time, remember that you are worthy of love that doesn't require you to shrink. You're worthy of relationships that don't leave you exhausted. You're worthy of a family, whether born or chosen, that sees you, values you, and shows up for you. Take care of yourselves, Gaz. Set those boundaries and never apologize for choosing your own well-being. Thank you and goodbye.